So, you see a pedestrian get a hit in a Miami crosswalk. It seems obvious who's at fault, right? Well, it's a whole different story. It's actually way more complicated than you'd think. We're going to unpack how Florida law really figures out who's responsible when things go wrong on these incredibly dangerous streets.
And look, that's not just some clickbait headline. It is a serious, stark reality. The fact that so many pedestrians get into accidents here really forces us to have a critical conversation about safety and, legal responsibility in a city that's famous for all its energy and hustle.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, we've got to start with the environment itself. What is it about Miami's crosswalks that makes them such high-risk zones for people who are just trying to cross the street?
Okay, check this out. It's like a perfect storm of factors. You've got these huge, wide roads that are practically built for speeding, not for pedestrian safety. Then you throw in tourists who have no idea how local traffic works, let's just say, aggressive driving culture, and a constant swarm of Ubers and delivery vans. And then, when the sun goes down, the visibility is awful. It's just a really complex mess.
All right, so if we want to figure out who's at fault, we have to start with the basics, the rules of the road. Let's dive into the actual laws that apply to both drivers and pedestrians when it comes to crosswalks.
So, first things first, what actually is a crosswalk? I know it sounds super obvious, but the legal definition is way broader than what most of us think. It's not just about those painted white stripes on the road.
And this right here is a huge point that so many people get wrong. It doesn't matter if there's paint on the road or not. Under Florida law, a pedestrian has the exact same legal protections. You know that corner where two sidewalks meet but there's no paint? Yep, that's a legal crosswalk.
So what's the deal for drivers? What does the law expect? Well, the number one rule is to yield. And this isn't just, a friendly suggestion. It's a legal requirement. You have to slow down or stop for anyone in a crosswalk. The law even uses this term, due care, which basically means drivers have to be actively looking out for people who might be crossing. But hey, it's not a one-way street. Pedestrians have responsibilities too. You've got to obey the walk and don't walk signals. You can't just suddenly dart out into traffic where a driver has zero chance to stop. And generally, you have to use reasonable care for your own safety. It's a shared responsibility for sure. Okay, so we've got the rules down. But what happens when things go wrong? How does the legal system actually figure out who's to blame after a crash? This is where things get really interesting. You see, Florida has this system called modified comparative negligence. It's not an all-or-nothing blame game. Instead, the court assigns a percentage of fault to everyone involved. And that little percentage, it turns out to be incredibly important, as you're about to see. Let's look at this example. Say the driver is found to be 70% at fault, but the pedestrian was maybe looking at their phone and is found 30% at fault. Because the pedestrian's fault is under that magic 50% line, they can still get money for their injuries. It'll just be reduced by their 30% of the blame. But watch what happens if we flip those numbers around. If the pedestrian is found to be more than 50% responsible, say 60%, they are completely barred from recovering any money at all. Nothing. That 51% mark is a hard and fast cutoff in Florida. But wait, what if it's not just the driver and the pedestrian? This is Miami we're talking about. Accidents here can get complicated with lots of different factors and sometimes lots of different people who could be at fault. Yep, the blame can spread out to a whole bunch of other parties. Think about it. What about the company that employs a delivery driver or a rideshare company? Heck, it could even be the city or state if the intersection was just designed poorly and was super unsafe. It can turn into a really complex web really fast. Okay, so knowing all this legal stuff is one thing. But what can you actually do to protect your rights if you're ever in this awful situation? Let's talk about that, because the next part is all about evidence and the really critical steps you need to take. So you might be wondering, how does this all get proven? How do we go from a he said, she said argument to an actual legal decision on who was at fault? Well, the answer is simple: evidence. The whole story of who's at fault is pieced together using all this stuff, but you've got to pay attention to that note at the bottom, because this is huge. Video footage from traffic cams or local businesses is pure gold, but it often gets deleted, sometimes in just a few days. So you have to act fast. It's absolutely essential. So if you're ever in an accident, these 5 steps are your playbook. First, get an official report by calling 911. Second, please prioritize your health and get medical attention. Third, document everything you can. And fourth, get witness info. But number 5 is so important. Do not give a recorded statement to any insurance company until you've talked to a lawyer. And this quote really just nails it, doesn't it? A pedestrian can mess up, but that doesn't just let the driver off the hook. The driver has this basic duty to be careful, to be aware, that whole do care thing we talked about. And failing to do that can still make them the one who's mostly responsible.
So there you have it. We've gone through the laws, the whole system of fault, what kind of evidence matters. But it kind of leaves us with this one big question, right? Knowing how all this works is absolutely critical for getting justice after something terrible happens. But is just knowing the rules really enough to stop these tragedies from happening in the first place on Miami's streets?